what advice you would give to someone who is starting a game company, starting a studio? From again, you guys have had a couple swings at this, so
Start talking to your players really early, whether that's not specific to like community management side of it, although that too, but making sure that as early as possible, real players are playing your game and giving you feedback. And then, oh God, this sounds so stupid. Listen to their feedback.
mm,
um, we see a lot of companies will wait until they're quite far into development before they get players testing the game. And something that often happens in that case is that they're so committed to the choices that they've made that players will give them feedback about, X feature or Y choice. And, but they're so far into development that they don't feel like they can make a change, or they see that as like a non-negotiable part of the game at
yeah,
that point.
they
And so the
become
player
ego
feedback doesn't
invested.
help them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And so I think like for us, we want players to be interacting with the game as early as possible. We get a lot of feedback from them. We'll do a lot of testing regularly throughout the development process. And I think the more that you can put your game in the hands of real players, the better you'll be.
It was our hundred. It was 101 calendar days from the first line of code written to our first public playtest, and we haven't turned the servers off since. And I mean, we didn't have the concept of like a texture in the game at that point, and we were like running a live service, a 24/7 365 live service, and like with players with goals and the whole nine yards, and like regular player feedback. I can't underscore this enough. Like, if there's not scary levels of fundamental assumptions at in question when you're playtesting, then you're not actually playtesting. Like, then you're not building it for them, right? Like, if
yeah,
real players are not talking to you about the fundamentals of your game and putting those into question, because you're not gonna no one's got 1,000 batting average, and so like,
yeah,
and if you wait, to Jen's point, to when those are fully crystallized and like the only things that you can change are like the color of a button on a menu, like you're too late. Like, we learned this the hard way on Dauntless, right? Like, we did not fundamentally engage about the reasons that players felt successful and incentivized until it was far too late. So like, we had built the whole game based on like using loot boxes. Then loot boxes went out of fashion very, very quickly, and then we switched over towards like a more standard progression model, and then we sold skins in a bespoke fashion, a la how Riot does it, right? And we were like, oh, Riot did it, we'll be fine. We did it before, we'll do it again. And what we learned through that process was, and we learned the hard way, not the good way, that in a hunting action game, you go out and and I'll say this and it will resonate, and you'll be like, how did you not realize this? You go out and you kill a giant beaver, and then you take its skins and you make a cool hat. And you're like, dope, I've got this more powerful hat. And then we hit you with a screen that says, now you can look like Batman if you pay $20. You know what people don't want to do after that? Go and kill another creature, because now they look like Batman. And like, surprise, surprise, it really takes and you know what also happens when you see Batman walking around and you realize that the only way that you get to look like that is if you spend a bunch of money. Turns out you'd stop wanting to go and kill beavers, and like,
right, yeah, yeah,
and like,
right,
surprise, surprise, right? And so like,
mm.
We like, if I think about like when we were doing kind of the product assumptions in like Dauntless days, we looked at Monster Hunter and we're like, wow, they could just sell skins. Oh my God, like the couple that they sell are great, but like no one uses them after the first couple of levels, and all of the late game armor looks so much better. Now,
That's it.
I could like, duh, we should sell skins.
Right.
Duh, we should not have sold skins.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
incredibly high monetization rates that then had a like monumentally negative impact on retention. Turns out, real bad idea.
That I love that specific example though, because it is something where a lot of games are attempting these sorts of monetization models that are, you still see people either chasing free to play or integrating some form of, um, let's just like, well, not gameplay impacting cosmetic improvements through some mechanism, and that's just a really great example of like, hey, remember why people play, and if you don't know,
Go ask them.
um, you better go ask them. And I think one of the other ones is like watch them, watch
Yeah.
because sometimes they won't even know
Yeah.
too. Like that be like because again to your example, ask someone playing Dauntless, hey, do you want to look like Batman? They might be like, yeah, I want to look like Batman, and you're like, well, I shouldn't have asked
Have
that.
we done a better job of like to your point, watching them, like watching folks go through the menus and looking at the armor and going, and then immediately going on like, and you can kind of tell when you watch somebody play like an action RPG when they see something and they go into like the inspect menu and then they immediately open up some progression menu and like draw the map in their mind of how to get there, going like, oh, now that's why, right? And like, and then if they immediately go on a quest that would like is the first step of
Right.
that
Yep.
journey, and we just didn't do it. And like,
Yeah.
I'm not mad at anybody internally. Like it's my own damn fault. We had based our assumptions on faulty data, and like coming back to your question, like what are some of the meta learnings? Like I have a sticky note under my monitor that says, how do I know that whatever I'm thinking is true,
Yeah.
right? Like, and I think that like that it's first know thyself and question everything and make sure that you have a really good fundamental understanding of why something is the case and whether or not like is that based on how I've always done it or is that based on like the a more modern like I think about like, hey, we should always use Maya because that's how it's always been done, or does Maya solve our current problem, or does Blender do a good enough job, or whatever, right? Do I understand why people go on hunts in Dauntless, and do I know that that's true, or do I think that that's true?
Yeah.
And like, and how do I know? Like, do I have a real like, have I asked the five whys and blah blah blah? Like, there are lots of ways to get to that answer, but like, really having the discipline to kind of go back and really revisit core fundamentals of like, I think if we take it to a different point in the conversation as well around like, the kind of almost like the hey, you're supposed to start studios in a remote only configuration now. That's the only way that you're supposed to do it, and kind of going like, hey, how do I know that? Is that just LinkedIn telling me, or like, will that actually create significant negative impact on my ability to attract and retain talent? And we've had, yeah, there have been people that we would love to get to work with, but we've had no meaningful impact on the ability to attract and retain.
So we talked about know thyself, know thy goal. You just talked about question everything. Do you think it? Do you know it? Continue to question. What else came to mind as again advice?
For folks who are starting studios
Yeah.
or starting new teams, I mean, this one sounds really silly, but we talk about this a lot with folks of like, know how you make money and know how much money you need to make. Um, again, a lot of folks who have started studios in the last 5 years did so because they had like an aspirational game goal of something they wanted to make or do differently in the game space. And a lot of folks who are coming out of big AAA companies didn't have experience running a business or running a P&L or understanding necessarily how the monetization of a system worked and then how it fed through different layers of publishers and first party platforms and like how your gross got to your net and those types of things. And if you don't set yourself up to understand how your business is going to make money, what order the people in the business and all of your relationships are going to get paid, and then how much you need to keep yourself afloat, you can end up, and something that we experienced, in a position where you launch your game, it does great, you get tons of players, you're super happy, but the money order doesn't line up in the order of your bills necessarily.
Yeah, yeah,
And you can put yourself into a really tight spot if you haven't really like internalized and understood that cash flow model ahead of
Well,
time.
and what the the totality of um, the range of success that
Mm,
is actually meaningfully achievable. Like
yeah.
I think, to your point, most folks kind of go, well, if I sell a $60 box and I sell a million units, then I'll get 60 million bucks. It's like, well, no, you won't, right? Like, Steam will take 30%. That currencies, blah, 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 takes another 13 to 17%, depending on where you exist retail. So you don't even have a publisher and you're already almost lost half of your money. Um,
yeah,
you know, and I think a lot of folks think, oh, well, I can sell a couple of million units. The number of games that, like, Valve looks at Valve weeds out more than 90% of games that are like actual viable games. And that they say that as games over 1,000 units. At, they don't even bother putting on their page games that they don't think are likely to make $250,000. And the number, and that gets you to the silver category, right? And so, like, there are not that many categories above, and there are not that many games above. And 60% of those games didn't come out last year. So, like, you got to ask yourself a real hard question of, like, is your business viable if you only got 250,000 units or less, right? Like, are you building a business that's viable on a baseline success, not on an outside success? And, like, do
yeah.
other games that you're thinking about making in that show, like if you're making a single player life sim or like a single player survival crafting game right now, and you think that you're going to make $1 million, um, you
Yeah,
got
I have some concerns for you.
yeah,
yeah,
there are 317 survival crafting games on Steam today,
yeah.
317, and so like you better. I hope your business is structured to not require multiple millions of units
This
because
is
in a survival crafting concept you're unlikely to make them.
I love this because when I've asked this question to different people, this question of like what advice would you give to a startup, and uh, it is so interesting that this is often what happens. I get a couple of like I love them, but I know some people are like, "That's not concrete. You didn't tell me what to do." Like I get, because there's these abstract things that say like, "Look, life is really nuanced and complex." So something like "Know thyself, know thy goals" is really important. And you're like, "Yeah, but I mean, I was gonna do that." And it was like, "No, you weren't." A lot of people didn't. They forgot that step. Like you get busy and you get moving and you forget it. So you start with a couple of abstract points and then you jump into like a very concrete like, just so you know, games make money as that's how they survive, or they don't survive. And you have to take that seriously. Unless if you're playing with someone else's money, like play money for some reason because of the way life.
Yeah,
And most people are not playing with play money; they're playing with
yeah.
real money. And so anyway, it's like I see that jump, and then all the places where people want like, well, first you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. It's like that doesn't exist. We've got some really pragmatic, practical, like just earth level foundation, and then you have some abstract, like there's thinking you gotta do, and there's
Yeah.
ways that you need to frame, um, and it's been very consistent. It's
But I think if we kind of come back to like build a business that's based on the right baselines a little bit, like and taking those ideas, like you don't have to take my word for it. Like go look at like this, um the Hades folks as an example. Like Bastion was not made on the same budget that Hades 2 is.
mm-hmm.
And those folks had to work real hard to stay alive in the early days because but they knew it. They knew it walking in, and they had a vision. They knew what those electrozabbers were, but clay folks were right. Like they, in those particular cases, they knew they would be making business decisions that would require them to have, a back catalog of games, merch, XYZ in order for them to be successful. And they were very thoughtful about these things. And, uh, and like, whether you're trying to make Supergiant or you're trying to make Riot, like, both of these companies were very thoughtfully based like the
Yeah.
foundation was very thoughtfully built out, and it and while the games are an important component of it, there was still a business plan and a business strategy that was based on like
Yeah.
an Excel doc.
Right.
And
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
and the cold, awful feeling of looking at that Excel doc and go and asking yourselves like, what if it's worse than I anticipate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, okay, can I make this work if I only sell 100,000 units?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you know, and do I have some sort of unique insight to get it to from 100 to 250,000? Do I like because no one's doing that right now. Like, so like, what insight do I have? And like, really like second guessing, like know thyself, but also second guess everything.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is. I won't name any specifically. I see a lot of games out there right now where they've launched, and I would say that the general vibe is like, it's a good game. Seems like it's a
Yeah.
good game, and you see either not enough traction at start, or you see sort of the spike dip. And again, spike dip is fine if you're like if it's a big enough spike and you're selling a
If you're
single player experience.
structured
If
to
you're
support
structured
that.
correctly, right?
Absolutely.
You know, but for a lot of these, they're live service plays. And I see people say stuff like, "Well, I hope they figure it out. I hope they, you know, they puzzle through that thing." And I go like,
Well, if it's on Steam, it's already too late at that point.
I mean, for me, it's there are examples of that. I think Rainbow Six Siege would be one where you had sort of spike, drop, and recovery, but that was deep investment over a very long period of time.
It was also a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. Yeah, that too. It is a dated example now. And I look at this and I just go like, you know, there's a lot of people saying I hope they've got a rabbit to pull out of their hat, or I hope they've got something, and I'm just like, I don't. I mean, look, anything's
don't.
possible. I guarantee there's some game out there that like contradicts what I'm about to say, but I'm honestly like, dude, if you didn't hit it, you missed. Like that was your
It's
window. That was your,
very, yeah, comeback stories are very rare in our industry.
yeah.
Well, especially, you know, we talked about this earlier in the conversation a little bit, but there are, you know, a lot of games, you know, launching a game in 2025 is very different than launching a game in 2018. You know, if we use the Siege version of this, there weren't that
Yeah.
many Counter-Strike competitors in 2016, 2017. And at that point, I can remember in 2014 looking at a marketing survey around, or like a marketing analysis around the stickiness factor of tack shooter players. And remember, this is like pre battle passes and other retention tooling being built into games, right? And so if we kind of look at the era of Rainbow Six Siege, a lot of that stickiness stuff didn't exist. Now it does. And so like if you're making a game that doesn't hit on launch and players go back to, you know, if you're making a MOBA and you compete up against League and you don't hit on launch, why would they try again?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And like and I think that Steam early access used to be this incredible opportunity space. Now it's just an opportunity for you to kill yourself, I think. And I mean that like like now in the most competitive time in I think in our industry's history, you would launch a game that it is not ready, not in its pinnacle state.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like that, like I think the value of getting it out there to players is huge. But the amount of data that players have access to today, right? Like Steam DB wasn't Steam charts wasn't a thing 10 years ago or 5 years ago even. You know, influencers on YouTube, regardless of how you want to think about them, now can decide whether or not your game is successful on its own, like without even having opened the game. They can just say, look,
Yep.
this game is a 0 because it doesn't have enough CCU base. Like, and so like if you are putting a game that knowingly isn't ready for primetime consumption out, it just invites the world to kind of knock off
Right.
any
Yeah.
chance that it has at the knees, because like first impressions are everything. And when there's so much competition, especially when we talk about like fast follows or underserved audiences, like how many extraction shooters exist. So if you're not like, if you want to try and get a Tarkov player to come play your game, that's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do it twice.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the extraction always comes up in these conversations. I am a big Tarkov player. I love it, and I've messed with a lot of the other ones, and it's brutal. I think
And you're never going to want to stick with one that's just as, like you know how to play Tarkov, you know how to win. Why would you
right.
want to go and play Extraction Shooter
Yeah.
53 and
Right.
lose access
Exactly.
to...
I think again, you look at recent relative successes. Delta Force actually did better than I thought. In going into the Battlefield space, I think Battlefield left themselves vulnerable, and that's why. But Marvel Rivals obviously came out, but that one's got a lot of IP behind it, a lot of, childhood.
It was also pretty done.
It was what?
Polished. It was done.
Oh, that game was ready.
That was like fundamentally finished.
Yeah, no. For me, the big example of an early access success is the Baldur's Gate 3. That is the best one, and it's a very different style of game. And also, I don't know if they'd do that again today. I don't know if they would take that risk. Because
they financially they don't need to anymore, right?
They don't need.
They needed the money the first time around.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that they also
an interesting set of like plays, right? Like that particular segment of the market isn't super competitive.
Right.
It's
you can't fast follow that
generate.
very well. Yeah.
Nope, you can't. Yeah. Right? Like there's like Owlcat and a few others that like are meaningful competitors, but they were always the market lead in the CRPG space.
Right.
And like they had the luxury of it creating opportunity in it caused their back catalog to explode as well, right? Like Divinity Original Sin 2 started to do really well when people wanted some more Baldur's Gate when they ran out of chapter, the first chapter of the game, or first act of the game, excuse me. And that actually bought them more time. If you're a first-time game studio and you don't have that kind of ecosystem available to you, either way, know thyself, right? Like, know where you sit
know your
in the
limitations.
market and what tools you have to play. And like, and if you're one of 3 companies in a given genre space that has any sort of legs and you've got, 15 years of history behind you, it's a little bit different. Or if you're, coming off the success of Goat Simulator and you're able to take the time to make a factory game, Giver, right? But like, if you're a first time founder and you've got, you got to be successful, you should be very careful when players publicly get to start playing. Right.
Well, I think that's also too that speaks to the idea of not only has the market changed, but the players are part of the market. Their perception of what early access means has completely shifted since it first launched. Like, I mean, I don't, it's hard to almost go back and remember some of the things they called early access, like games that were just totally unfinished, missing core systems, and they would launch it and you'd buy it for $10 to try something that was in development. And I mean, if you, like you said, that you're just shooting your game.
Stuff you couldn't get away with that at some of the things like, on League, we didn't have a store when we launched.
Yeah. Right.
And I can remember
that was a hard decision. That was a very hard decision, but yes, I think they made, they made the right one.
Yep. Absolutely. But I don't think a company can make that decision in the same way anymore. Right. Like there's literally a new generation of gamers, right? Like it's been long enough that like the Gen Zs of the world have access to so much high quality content that like I don't think you can kind of get away with the same sort of thing in the same way that you once were able to. And so like and if there were if the emotional response to that is, well, I don't have enough money to get it done, it's like, well, this is where good game direction comes out. And good product management skills starts to like differentiate of like, okay, well, how do you develop enough game to rise above the cream of the crop on the small enough budget,
Yeah, and how can you do it on the smallest budget possible?
Right.
And this is where the the real hard part gets in.
Yeah. This is a podcast for leaders in game development. I got a lot of producers out there. If you lead teams in game or software development and you're tired of wasteful and unreliable estimation, I built an online course just for you. It's called Advanced Estimation for Game and Software Development, and it's a self-paced course with over 15 hours of content, real-world examples, and tools you can start using right away. Estimation doesn't have to be a morale-draining mess. Planning doesn't have to feel unrealistic and contrived. You can do better, and this course will help. Early access is now open with lifetime access and a big launch discount, but there's limited seats at this price point. Check it out at this URL or in the show notes below.